And I encourage you all to go shopping more.
After the 9/11 terror attacks, when people said, what should we do now? How can we help? President Bush said, go shopping. In other words, we don't need you. We can deal with this. So, the government doesn't need citizens in the way that it did. And that, I fear, makes democracy a kind of vestigial organ, like the appendix.
Voices that help us see ourselves not first and foremost as black or white or Asian or Latino, not as gay or straight, immigrant or native born.
Democracy is the power of the people. The demos kratos, the kratos power and demos people.
Where people share equally in control of the broad direction of government. That's the one sentence.
Now we say one person, one vote. However, in the 19th century, the slogan was a little different. It was one man, one vote, one gun. Citizen soldiers, citizen finance for the government gave citizens a great deal of power. And they're directly tied to the right to vote and to democratic politics.
Democracy is a system in which parties lose elections. Democracies are systems in which citizens, if they so wish, by some procedures, can change those who govern them. More than that, can throw out the governments they don't like. That's democracy. I don't think citizens can do much more.
We are downsizing because the number of things that citizens do. See, democracy is more than just checking an X at election time. Democracy, a robust democracy, means that citizens do a lot of things. In 19th century America, citizens were administrators. Andrew Jackson said, the work of the government isn't so complicated. Anybody can do it. And so ordinary citizens were administrators. Today, no.
Well, I guess I would say democracy is a system that's responsive to the interests and concerns of ordinary citizens.
Democracy is a system in which people have a great deal of influence over what government does.
So where you've got a foreground of democracy, that's what's on the stage. We're electing, there are these bodies and so on. But behind the wings of the offstage, so to speak, in the wings, you have these corporate entities that are, and these very wealthy people associated with them, who are pulling the strings, so that really what we're seeing isn't the reality. And that's the real challenge, to develop a democracy that is going to be resistant to that sort of plutocracy, to the influence of the wealthy and the powerful.
In the early 1980s, rich individuals, say the top tenth of 1% of the population, they contributed about 15% of all the money that went to national political campaigns. And now it's about 40%. If you allow a few people or a few organizations that have so many resources to play such a heavy role in political decision making.
So real wages for male workers are about what they were in the late 1960s. Productivity has gone way up, but if you look at the great growth periods, 1950s, 1960s, wages, including the minimum wage, tracked productivity as it should, but that's broke. That relationship broke by the late 1970s, meaning people are can see that they're declining, or at best stagnating, while wealth is accumulating in the hands of someone else. In fact, a very small percentage of the population, to a large extent in the pockets of the financial institutions.
A very large proportion of the wealth of a society is going to a very, very, very small proportion of the population. I think that is a politically inflammatory perception, and I don't think it will prove to be politically sustainable indefinitely.
And I think that because we haven't separated out business and commerce from the state in the way in which we've separated out the church from the state, business, the business world, controls too much of what the state does. And that accounts for the fact that in many of these countries, government, the state, the law has been prepared to allow a degree of inequality that actually is objectionable, and I think does impact negatively on the freedom of ordinary people. In the relation of citizen to citizen, no one should be master over another, and that even if a master was very kind to the person who was his subject, that didn't make that subject free. You had to be independent of the power of the other.
Clearly, in some sort of inequality generates incentives. So if you feel that you can become rich, you work hard and you become more productive and you support the growth of the economy. Poverty in the world has declined tremendously in the last 2 or 3 decades. So inequality in the world as a whole has gone down because, for example, because Chinese people have become so much richer than they were 20 or 30 years ago. So many people have exited poverty. That is a great success of capitalism. And so, on the other hand, it is true that inequality has gone up in some countries.
People don't like inequality, but they really care more about their own income. My Korean students, when they came to this country for the first time, they always came and told me how unequal Korea is. And at that time, it was not unequal by our standards. At that time, it was quite equal. Now it's more unequal. But most people care about their own income. I think what really hurts is that their incomes are not going up. That they think that their children may not live better than they do. That's threatening.
Inequality in itself may be problematic, but when that inequality becomes entrenched, that is to say, people from different generations don't change where they are in the socioeconomic hierarchy, then you begin to have real social problems and real political problems because divisions in society harden, they become less permeable, and different groups become more resentful of other groups in society, and that can present real problems for democracy.
There are different fundamental principles, right, that these systems are organized around. Democracy is, at least in principle, the idea is that everyone should have a reasonable chance to participate and to have a say in what the government does. In markets and capitalism, it's your economic power determines how much say you have. Dollars become more important than votes.
Democracy is a very dangerous system to people with property. What is democracy? Democracy says political equality, everybody has equal political influence, and majority rule. Yes, that is, decisions are decided by majority of equal citizens. Majority of citizens in any country are poor.
Am Anfang hat der Kapitalismus die Menschen aus der Feudalgesellschaft, aus der Hörigkeit befreit, hat sie sozusagen zu freien Menschen gemacht. Das war wichtig für die Demokratie. Es ist überall eine große Arbeiterklasse entstanden, meistens sogar die Mehrheit der Gesellschaft. Die hat für die Demokratie gekämpft, sodass dieser Kapitalismus für die Entstehung der Demokratie sehr wesentlich war. Das Verhältnis zwischen Kapitalismus und Demokratie hat sich in den letzten 20 Jahren vielleicht sehr stark geändert. Erstens durch die Globalisierung. Die Märkte sind global, die Demokratien sind national. Die Demokratien können den globalen Kapitalismus kaum noch kontrollieren. Und dann haben wir gesehen, die Finanzmärkte, die sind so problematisch, die sind unreguliert. Die haben große Probleme erzeugt, sodass die Politik die Demokratie oft unbedingt machen musste, was die Finanzmärkte vorgegeben haben. Also die Macht der Demokratie ist durch diese beiden Entwicklungen sehr stark reduziert worden.
Starting in the late 1970s, we saw in many affluent democracies, especially the United States and Britain, the rise of what is called neoliberalism. Now, by neoliberalism, we mean a return to the emphasis on limited government and free markets that was characteristic of the old liberal creed of David Ricardo or Adam Smith. But this was a new kind of liberalism because it was much more aggressive and much more willing to say that government was the problem.
Conservatives and the business community began to push back very hard against the systems of public policy that had developed in the post-war period, and to argue for a shift towards markets, and they became very critical of government's role in the economy. And there's a way, again, in which there's a kind of self-reinforcing process here where policies weaken the role of government, shifted income and power towards some of these conservative groups and towards the business community.
Adam Smith actually wrote about how you needed to have taxes to fund an effective government. He called taxes the badge of liberty. That is, that they were the sign that we were governing ourselves. We were funding a government that acted on our behalf. Well, Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher, they did not come into office calling taxes the badge of liberty. The neoliberals said that taxes were the wellspring of all the terrible things that were happening in the economy in the 1970s.
I mean, certainly, I think it's easier to just to look at it as a single process. I mean, what has happened across the advanced capitalist world since the early 1980s has been that a single conception of how to organize political choice and economic choice has become increasingly dominant and increasingly hard to challenge. And that is one in which the priority of presumptively free choice on markets by consumers and presumably producers as well is taken to have priority over absolutely everything else.
There are a variety of reasons, I think, why neoliberalism became more dominant in the last decades of the 20th century. Some of it may have had to do with the aftermath of the 1960s, people distrusting government more, people distrusting authority more. A lot of it was a backlash to what was seen as the extreme growth of government, social policies, and the welfare state after the Second World War.
Fukuyama was saying the end of history, the liberal democracy is won, there is no alternative. And this is, for instance, why they say that the categories of left and right have become obsolete. So and that's what they call the third way. There is possibility of a consensus at the center. That also must be put into the context of the ideological victory of neoliberalism and the fact of what we call the hegemony of neoliberalism. Because the main thesis of the hegemony of neoliberalism is that there is no alternative to neoliberal globalization.
It's not clear, actually, in neoliberal terms, why democracy is better than a non-democratic form of government. And actually, the early classical liberals were quite clear about this. They said that if you had a benign dictator, if you had a single person or a party in power, which actually was very wise and very gentle and very kind, and set up good laws and so on, it might actually do more for people's freedom, because it might involve protect them more effectively against private interference, not impose much public interference, might actually do better than a democracy. I suspect this may be a reason why the Chinese government quite likes neoliberalism,